If you grew up in a house where a father or an uncle ran the grill, you knew the ritual before you knew the recipes. The fire was lit before anyone was awake. The smell of hickory reached down the block by mid-morning, and by the time the plates came out, half the neighborhood had found a reason to stop by. These were not dishes from a cookbook. They were built from the cuts the butcher priced to move, from patience and smoke and hands that never wrote anything down. Number 21 on this list was one of those cheap cuts that steakhouses now build their menu around. Number 8 on this list was made from the part of the chicken most people never even see. The food industry traded these men and their fire for franchises, gas burners, and bottled sauce. Hit subscribe because here are 30 BBQ dishes Black fathers cooked that nobody talks about anymore. Number 30, barbecued duck. In the Mississippi Delta, East Arkansas, and the bayou parishes of Louisiana, a father who hunted waterfowl brought ducks home and grilled them whole over hickory. Wild duck was leaner and tougher than store-bought poultry, and it needed slow heat and constant basting to keep from drying out. A father split the bird down the center, seasoned it with salt, pepper, and garlic, and mopped it with thin vinegar sauce for 2 hours until the skin went dark and the fat underneath melted clean through the meat. Duck at a cookout was a hunter's offering. It meant a man had walked into the marsh before dawn and come back with something worth putting on the fire. When hunting traditions faded and wild game stopped showing up at family gatherings, the cookout duck disappeared with the men who brought it. Number 29, barbecued turkey tails. The tail section of a turkey carries more fat per ounce than nearly any other cut of poultry. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Black fathers bought them by the bagful because turkey processors practically gave them away. Seasoned with garlic salt, black pepper, and cayenne, then laid on the cool side of the grill until the fat rendered and the skin went crispy. They came off looking like nothing and tasting like everything. A plate of turkey tails at a cookout was a quiet flex. The cut is nearly impossible to find in most American grocery stores today. Several Pacific Island nations imported so many that health authorities pushed back and the domestic supply dried up almost overnight. Number 28, charcoal roasted sweet potatoes buried in the ash. While the meat smoked above, the sweet potatoes cooked below. A father wrapped them in foil, or sometimes not at all, and pushed them straight into the hot coals at the base of the grill. They sat there for an hour, sometimes longer, until the skin turned to paper and the inside went soft enough to eat with a spoon. No butter, no brown sugar. The heat and the smoke did the work. The charcoal gave them a flavor no oven in any kitchen could replicate. This was the side dish nobody planned. It just happened because there was fire and there were sweet potatoes and a man who knew what to do with both. Number 27, grilled pork steaks. In St. Louis and the small towns lining both sides of the Mississippi, Black fathers grilled pork steaks the way other men grilled burgers. The pork steak is a cross-cut from the shoulder blade, bone still in, sold cheap because most people considered it a second-rate cut. A father seasoned them the night before, grilled them low over charcoal until the fat cap melted into the meat, then finished them in a foil pan with barbecue sauce until the whole thing went tender enough to fall apart with a fork. That was supper 3 or 4 nights a week in the summer. The cut is still sold in St. Louis. Outside of it, most people have never heard of a pork steak. Number 26, hot link sandwiches on white bread. The hot link is a coarsely ground, heavily spiced beef and pork sausage with no equivalent in European charcuterie. Black fathers grilled them over direct heat until the casing split and the fat ran into the fire. The smoke that rose back up carried the flavor of every spice in the link. Served on 2 slices of white bread with raw onion and yellow mustard, It was the cheapest full meal at any cookout. A pack cost almost nothing. Every region had its own local maker, brand names handwritten on butcher paper, and none of them survived the consolidation of the American meat industry in the 1990s. Number 25, barbecued chicken gizzards on a skewer. Gizzards are tough, dense muscle, and most cooks threw them away with the giblet bag. Black fathers soaked them in buttermilk, seasoned them heavy, threaded them onto metal skewers, and grilled them slow over low coals until they went tender inside and charred outside. The texture was nothing like regular chicken. It was closer to a chew than a bite. Children either loved them or refused to touch them. There was no middle ground. A pound cost less than a single chicken breast, and a father could feed a table of 8 from that 1 pound. The gizzard skewer disappeared when supermarkets stopped selling gizzards by the bag and started grinding them into pet food. Number 24, smoked turkey wings. A single turkey wing weighs close to a pound, and in the 1970s, they were among the cheapest poultry cuts in the case. Black fathers rubbed them with seasoning salt, smoked paprika, and black pepper, then set them on the grate far from the heat and let the smoke work. 2 hours later, the skin had gone the color of dark honey, and the meat pulled clean off the bone in long strips. At family reunions, the turkey wings always ran out first. They had the richness of dark meat with the smokiness of a rib, and they cost a fraction of either. The wing fell out of favor when turkey processors began marketing whole breasts and tenderloins, and the cheap cuts vanished from the shelf. Number 23, grilled deer sausage. Rural Mississippi, Alabama, and East Texas shared a calendar where hunting season and cookout season overlapped. A father who hunted brought home venison, ground it with pork fat and red pepper flake, stuffed it into natural casings, and froze it in coils for the summer. That sausage showed up at every 4th of July and Labor Day gathering. It was leaner, spicier, and carried a wild gaminess that divided the table. The ones who grew up on it could never eat commercial sausage the same way again. Deer sausage required a hunter, a meat grinder, natural casings, and more time than most men were willing to give. When those fathers stopped going into the woods, the sausage stopped showing up at the table. Number 22, barbecued lamb ribs. Before the price of lamb climbed beyond reason, Black fathers in the Mid-South and parts of Tennessee treated lamb ribs the same way they treated pork. The ribs were smaller, thinner, and cooked faster, with a sharp mineral taste that pork could not match. Seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, grilled hot until the thin layer of fat crisped and the bone ends went black. They were eaten by hand, standing over the grill, one thin rib at a time, the grease running down to the wrist. Lamb ribs today cost more per pound than a ribeye steak in most markets. The cookout lamb rib was not killed by taste. It was killed by price. Here is something worth saying out loud. The men who ran these grills were not chefs. They were truck drivers, deacons, mechanics, factory line workers. They never opened a cookbook. They never measured a single ingredient. They learned by standing next to their own fathers, watching how the smoke moved, learning when to flip by the sound the fat made when it hit the coals. That knowledge traveled across generations and produced food that rivaled anything coming out of competition circuits and restaurant kitchens. But none of it was recorded. None of it was photographed. When those men died, the recipes died with them. The split drums went cold. The cinder block pits got hauled off. And a whole industry stepped in with vacuum-sealed ribs and bottled rubs and store-bought sauce and acted like it had invented something. Number 21, barbecued beef short ribs. Before beef short ribs became a $40 entree at steakhouses in Brooklyn and Chicago, they sat in the meat case of every black neighborhood butcher in the South, priced to move because nobody wanted them. The bone was thick, the fat cap was heavy, the meat between the bones was dark, tough, and riddled with connective tissue that most cooks did not know how to handle. But a black father with a charcoal grill and a Saturday afternoon knew exactly what to do. The ribs went on bone side down, far from the heat, with the lid closed and a pan of water set underneath to keep the air moist. The temperature stayed low. Hours passed. Nobody checked. Nobody poked. The collagen dissolved into gelatin. The fat rendered slowly through the meat instead of dripping into the fire. What came off that grill bore no resemblance to what went on. The finished rib was dark on the outside, nearly black, with meat so tender it separated from the bone under its own weight. A whole slab cost less than $5 in the 1970s, and a man could feed 3 families from one purchase. The grandchildren who ate those ribs off paper plates in the backyard now see the same cut braised in red wine on white linen in restaurant windows, sold for more per rib than their grandfather paid for the whole slab. Nobody asked those men how they did it. Nobody credited the tradition. The restaurant industry took the cut, raised the price, and pretended it had discovered something new. Number 20, dirty rice cooked pit side. Along the Gulf Coast and across Louisiana, a father did not just grill meat, he cooked the rice on the same fire. Dirty rice got its name from the color, dark brown from chicken livers and ground meat cooked down with onion, celery, bell pepper, and cayenne. At a cookout, the pot sat on a grate at the edge of the grill, picking up smoke while the rice absorbed the stock. It served as the foundation of the plate, the thing everything else sat on top of. Every man had his version, and every version tasted different from the last. Dirty rice stopped appearing at cookouts when the men who made it stopped passing the method down. Number 19, scratch-made pit beans. These were not canned beans with ketchup stirred in. A father started with dried navy beans or pinto beans the night before, soaking them in cold water until morning. He cooked them low in a cast iron Dutch oven set beside the grill, adding brown sugar, molasses, mustard, and whatever drippings fell from the grate above. The beans cooked for hours, absorbing smoke and pork fat until they turned thick and dark and clung to the back of the spoon. Every man's beans tasted different because every man's grill threw different smoke. Today, cookout beans come from a can with a brand name on the label. The original took a full day, a real fire, and a man who was not in a hurry. Number 18, smoked whole chickens in a barrel smoker. A 55-gallon steel drum cut in half and fitted with a grate was the standard smoker in black neighborhoods long before commercial smokers filled hardware store shelves. A father rubbed whole chickens with seasoning salt, paprika, and black pepper, then set them breast side up on the grate above a small charcoal fire. The drum held the heat. The smoke circled inside. 2 hours later, the skin had gone the color of dark honey and the meat pulled apart with 2 fingers. A man could smoke 6 chickens at once and feed a block party on a $10 investment. The barrel smoker was built from salvage. It cost nothing. It outperformed every commercial unit sold today, and the men who built them never drew a blueprint. Number 17, grilled whole fish wrapped in foil. Along rivers and lakes across the South, a father who fished grilled his catch whole. Buffalo fish, carp, bream, whatever came out of the water that morning. He cleaned it on a board in the yard, laid it on heavy aluminum foil with onion slices, lemon, salt, pepper, and a splash of hot sauce, sealed the foil tight, and set the package directly on the coals. The fish steamed and smoked at the same time. When the foil came open, the flesh lifted right off the bone. This was not restaurant fish. This was a man's fish, caught and cooked and eaten in the same afternoon. The tradition faded when public fishing access shrank and store-bought fillers replaced the whole catch. There is a reason the word barbecue itself traces back centuries before any restaurant chain or competition circuit existed. The practice traveled through enslaved African communities who adapted it, perfected it, and turned open fire into a cuisine. Black fathers inherited that lineage directly. They did not learn from a book or a television screen or a weekend class. They learned from men who learned from men who learned from men who had no choice but to turn nothing into something over an open flame. Each dish that disappeared from these grills took a piece of that history with it. Nobody archived it. Nobody put it in a museum. The cookout was never just about the food. It was evidence that a man could provide, that a family was whole, that a neighborhood still held together. Number 16, barbecued goat shoulder. In parts of East Texas, rural Georgia, and the Carolinas, goat was not unusual. It was expected. A father bought a whole shoulder from a local farmer, sometimes traded for it, and grilled it the same way he grilled pork. The meat was leaner and tougher, which meant it needed more time on the grill and a steady hand with the temperature. Cooked right, goat shoulder had a clean, sharp flavor that no other meat on the grate could match. It was the centerpiece at church homecomings and Juneteenth gatherings in communities where goat farming was part of the local economy. When small farms closed and the supermarket became the only source, goat vanished from the cookout. Number 15, smoked beef sausage links made from scratch. Black fathers in Central Texas and along the Gulf Coast ground their own beef with pork fat, mixed in garlic, black pepper, cayenne, and sometimes paprika, stuffed the mixture into natural casings, and hung the links in the smoker for hours. The result was nothing like commercial sausage. It was coarser, fattier, and heavy with garlic. Each family had its own spice ratio, passed down without a single word written on paper. Some men sold their links at gas stations and roadside stands. Some only made them for family. A father's sausage was as personal as his handwriting. Today, the gas station cooler holds factory sausage shipped in from 4 states away. Number 14, barbecued pig snouts. This is the one most people born after 1985 have never heard of. The pig snout is cartilage, fat, and skin with almost no actual meat on it. In St. Louis, East St. Louis, and across the industrial Midwest, black fathers grilled snouts over high heat until the cartilage softened and the skin crisped into something halfway between a rib and a pork rind. The texture was unlike anything else at the cookout. It had a chew to it, a resistance. The flavor came from the fat and the char, and a man seasoned his snouts the same way he seasoned his ribs, heavy on the garlic salt, cayenne, and black pepper. The snout sandwich was served on white bread with barbecue sauce, sliced dill pickles, and a ring of raw onion. It was a staple at cookouts, block parties, and corner restaurants in Black St. Louis for generations. A father bought a whole box for next to nothing because the pork industry classified them as waste. The entire dish existed because black families looked at what the processors discarded and found a way to make it extraordinary. That sentence applies to half the food on this list. The snout sandwich did not vanish because people stopped wanting it. It vanished because the neighborhoods that kept it alive were gutted by highway construction, factory closures, and the slow drift of families to suburbs where the grills were smaller and the neighbors did not know what a snout was. A few corner joints in North St. Louis still serve them. Most of the country has never seen one. Number 13, grilled pork kidneys. Organ meat on the grill was not unusual at a black cookout in the 1960s and 1970s. Pork kidneys, split in half and soaked in salt water to pull the bitterness, were seasoned and grilled over medium heat until firm but not rubbery. The flavor was strong, iron-rich, and polarizing. A father who grilled kidneys usually ate them himself, standing at the grill because the children wanted no part of them, but the men at the cookout knew what they had. A grilled kidney with hot sauce and a cold drink was a private ritual between the cook and the fire, eaten standing up away from the table where the children sat. Kidneys vanished from cookouts when supermarkets stopped stocking organ meats, and a generation grew up never knowing the cut existed. Number 12, smoked hog jowl. The jowl is the cheek of the hog, a thick slab of meat and fat that sits between the jaw and the ear. It was once among the cheapest pork cuts in the South, used for seasoning greens, flavoring beans, and at cookouts, smoked whole on the grill until the outside went dark and the inside turned soft. Sliced thin, it tasted richer than bacon and smokier than ham. Black fathers bought jowl because it cost less than a pack of cigarettes and could stretch across a crowd. The jowl was the quiet cut, the one that showed up on every plate but never got its name called. Today, it has been rebranded as guanciale and sold at premium prices in Italian specialty shops. Nobody mentions where the practice started. Number 11, grilled hot sausage with onions and peppers. A cast iron skillet placed directly on the grill grate, loaded with sliced onions, green bell peppers, and lengths of hot sausage split down the middle. The vegetables cooked in the rendered sausage fat. The sausage picked up smoke from underneath. Everything in the skillet turned soft and charred at the edges. A father served it with a slotted spoon onto paper plates, and every plate looked different depending on what the spoon caught. There was no recipe. The ratio changed every time based on what was left in the cooler and how many mouths had shown up. The only constant was the heat from the sausage and the sweetness from the onions cooking down in the fat. The skillet dish faded when grilling shifted toward individual portions instead of one communal pan passed around the yard. Number 10, barbecued mutton. Western Kentucky, particularly around Owensboro and Henderson, never treated mutton as strange. It was the standard. Black fathers in that region cooked mutton the same way their grandfathers had, slow and low over hickory, mopped with a thin vinegar and Worcestershire sauce that cut through the gaminess of the older sheep. The meat was stronger than lamb, tougher, more assertive. It required patience and the kind of confidence that does not need approval. Mutton at a cookout was a statement. It said the cook knew exactly what he was doing and did not care if the taste was fashionable. The tradition faded as sheep farming declined and mutton disappeared from local cases. Number 9, smoked pork belly. Long before pork belly became a gastropub staple in the 2000s, Black fathers smoked whole slabs of it over charcoal until the fat went translucent and the edges crisped. It was not plated on a bed of microgreens with balsamic drizzle. It was sliced thick, laid on white bread, and eaten standing up in the yard. The slab cost less than $3, and nobody outside the cookout knew what it was. A father who served smoked pork belly was not making a culinary statement. He was feeding his family with what he could afford and making it taste better than anything a restaurant served. Today, a single gastropub portion of smoked pork belly costs more than that entire slab did. Number 8, barbecued chicken backs. The back is the part the butcher removes and most customers never see. It is mostly bone with thin strips of dark meat clinging to the rib cage and the spine. In the 1960s and 1970s, Black fathers bought bags of backs for pennies because nobody else wanted them. Seasoned heavy, grilled slow, and basted with vinegar sauce, the meat on a chicken back was some of the most flavorful on the entire bird. The children at the cookout fought over them, pulling small pieces of dark meat off the bones with their teeth, fingers shiny with sauce. The chicken back was the dish that made scarcity taste like abundance. Supermarkets stopped selling them loose and sent them to rendering plants instead. Number 7, smoked pork shoulder. The Boston butt, a cut from the upper portion of the front leg, was the foundation of black cookout barbecue across the entire South. A father started it before sunrise, set it on the grill, fat side up, and let it smoke for 10 to 12 hours without touching it once. The bark that formed on the outside was dark, cracked, and almost bitter from the wood. The meat underneath pulled apart with 2 forks. He shredded it on a cutting board in the yard while the family gathered around. No pulled pork sandwich existed yet. No slider, just meat on bread, maybe some sauce, maybe not. The pulled pork industry that exploded in the 2000s owes its entire foundation to the black fathers who perfected this method in their backyards without recognition. Number 6, dry rubbed spare ribs cooked the old way. Before competition, barbecue wrapped ribs in foil and glazed them in sugar. Black fathers cooked spare ribs with nothing but salt, black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. No foil, no wrap, no spritz bottle. The ribs sat on the grill for 5 to 6 hours over low charcoal, turned once, and came off with a bark so thick it cracked when the meat bent. The meat did not fall off the bone, it pulled clean with resistance. That resistance was the mark of a properly cooked rib. The modern rib, soft and sweet and almost candied, would have been turned away by any father who ran a serious grill. Tenderness was not the goal, flavor was. Number 5, grilled pork chops over an open flame, not boneless, not brined, not marinated overnight in a zip bag. A bone-in, center-cut pork chop, seasoned with whatever was in the cabinet, placed directly over hot coals. A father grilled pork chops fast and hot, flipped once. The outside charred, the inside stayed juicy if the timing was right and dry if it was not, and either way nobody complained because that was the food and you ate it. A grilled pork chop at a black cookout was not a recipe, it was an act. It required no instruction, no thermometer, no rest time. The chop was done when the man at the grill said it was done. Number 4, rib tips. When a butcher trimmed a full slab of spare ribs into the neat St. Louis cut, the strip he removed from the bottom was the rib tip, cartilage, bone fragments, and some of the richest, most flavorful meat on the animal. Most shops threw them away or sold them for close to nothing. Black fathers bought them by the pound. Seasoned and smoked the same way as full ribs, tips had a texture all their own, part crisp cartilage, part tender meat with edges that turned almost candy-like from the smoke and the fat. A plate of rib tips was the insider's order. The people who knew asked for tips before they asked for ribs. They are still sold in parts of Chicago and Memphis, but beyond those cities, the rib tip has been nearly forgotten. Number 3, barbecued beef heart. A single beef heart weighs close to 4 pounds, is almost entirely lean muscle, and in the 1960s cost less than $1 at the counter. Black fathers sliced it into thick steaks, soaked them in vinegar and garlic, and grilled them hot over direct coals. The texture was dense, closer to steak than to any other organ cut, and the flavor was clean and mineral rich. The heart was not organ meat the way liver or kidney was organ meat. It was pure working muscle. A man could feed his entire family from one heart, but the heart required a butcher who carried it, and when supermarkets replaced neighborhood shops, beef heart was one of the first cuts to leave the case. Most Americans under 50 have never seen one sold. Number 2, barbecued beef brisket. The entire state of Texas claims brisket, and the competition circuit has turned it into a science of temperature probes and butcher paper. But black pitmasters were smoking brisket in East Texas and Houston's Third Ward, and across the Gulf Coast decades before brisket became a brand. A father bought a whole Packer brisket because it was cheap and because he had the time. He seasoned it with salt and pepper, nothing else, and smoked it over post oak or pecan for 12 hours or longer. The bark went dark as coffee. The smoke ring ran deep. Nobody wrapped it, nobody probed it, nobody posted it. The brisket was carved on a board in the yard and eaten off butcher paper with white bread and sliced onion. That tradition is still alive, but the men who built it have been written out of the story entirely. Number 1, barbecued chicken halves with vinegar mop sauce. This was the dish, the one that crossed every state line, every decade, every income bracket. A whole chicken split down the backbone, flattened, seasoned, and laid open on the grill. The mop was simple: thin vinegar mixed with salt, pepper, cayenne, and sometimes a splash of hot sauce, applied with a rag tied to a stick or a brush made from whatever was in the garage. The chicken cooked for over an hour, mopped every 15 minutes until the skin pulled tight and the juices ran clear at the thigh. It was the most democratic dish in American barbecue. It required no expensive cut, no special equipment, no competition technique, just a man, a fire, and the patience to stay with it until it was done. That patience was the recipe, and that patience is what nobody talks about anymore. Peanut butter was cheap, flour was cheaper, and when you rolled one inside the other with powdered sugar and dropped it into hot oil, you had something that tasted like it cost 10 times what it did. Fried peanut butter balls appeared in black households during the 1940s and 50s when George Washington Carver's work at Tuskegee Institute had pushed the peanut across the South, and jars sat in pantries from rural Georgia to Harlem. The balls were simple: peanut butter mixed stiff with powdered sugar, rolled small, dipped in light batter, and fried until the coating crackled. Inside, the peanut butter melted into something almost molten, sticking to the roof of your mouth. Church women packed them into tins for bake sales where a dozen sold for a dime. The trick was speed: 30 seconds too long and the filling turned bitter. Only the ones who had fried them 100 times got it right, and they never told you the secret was oil temperature, not the clock. Cast iron seasoned skillet technique meant the pan itself contributed flavor built up over decades of use. Grandmothers never washed these skillets with soap. They wiped them clean, heated them dry, and rubbed them with oil to maintain the black coating. The seasoned surface created natural non-stick properties that let chicken release perfectly without tearing the crust. Heat distributed evenly across the heavy bottom, eliminating hot spots that could burn some pieces while undercooking others. Some grandmothers used the same cast iron their own grandmothers had cooked in, making each piece a connection to generations past. The pan's weight kept oil temperature stable when cold chicken was added, preventing the soggy crust that came from temperature drops. Pan-fried chicken with cream gravy was weeknight comfort that turned a simple bird into a meal worth remembering. The chicken pieces were dredged in seasoned flour and cooked slowly in cast iron with just enough shortening to come halfway up the sides. This was patient pan frying, turning pieces until the crust developed perfect golden brown. Once removed, flour was whisked into the drippings, followed by whole milk that bubbled and thickened into velvety cream gravy. The gravy carried all the seasoning and foam from the chicken, pale and rich with tiny flecks throughout. Families poured it generously over the chicken alongside mashed potatoes, letting everything mingle. This technique required attention and skill, knowing exactly when to flip and how much milk to add. Modern shortcuts have replaced this slow method. Long before beignets became the face of New Orleans, Black women walked the French Quarter at dawn carrying covered baskets, calling out in Creole, Beautiful callus, still hot. These rice fritters were made from leftover cooked rice mixed with yeast, eggs, sugar, flour, and nutmeg, fried in deep lard until golden and dusted heavy with powdered sugar. The word traces to West African languages, the Yoruba akara and Nupe kara, both meaning fried cake, carried across the Atlantic by enslaved people who adapted the recipe to Louisiana rice. Under Spanish colonial rule, enslaved people could purchase their freedom, and callus became one of the ways Black women earned that price, selling fritters penny by penny. By the 1940s, only a handful of callus women remained. The beignet pushed them aside, no overnight yeast rise needed. A dessert that once bought people their freedom barely survives now in a few Creole cookbooks and the memories of families who remember the taste. If those peach pies belong to summer, smothered fried chicken transformed already perfect fried pieces into something even more deeply comforting. After initial frying, chicken was placed back in the skillet and covered with rich gravy made from pan drippings, onions, and milk. The lid went on and everything simmered until coating softened and absorbed savory sauce while meat grew even more tender. This was weeknight cooking at its finest, stretching Sunday's fried chicken into Tuesday's dinner with deepening flavors. The gravy-soaked crust became almost dumpling-like, falling apart against the tongue while meat remained distinct. Children often preferred this to fresh fried because sauce made everything easier to eat and taste richer. Grandmothers knew this dish proved good food should never go to waste. Lard fried chicken represented the pinnacle of Southern frying before vegetable oils took over American kitchens. Pure rendered pork fat heated in cast iron created a frying medium that produced crusts unlike anything modern oils could achieve. The lard imparted subtle richness and helped the flour coating crisp into something impossibly crunchy while keeping the meat beneath juicy and tender. African American households often rendered their own lard from hog butchering, storing it in crocks for months. The fat could be reused multiple times, each batch adding more flavor to the next. The aroma of chicken frying in lard filled entire neighborhoods, announcing Sunday dinner to anyone within smelling distance. Health concerns pushed lard out of most kitchens, replaced by vegetable shortenings that never matched the flavor. Cornmeal fried cakes did not come from a recipe book. They came from watching, standing close enough to feel the heat while someone older stirred cornmeal into sweetened batter and dropped it by the handful into smoking lard. You poured until the batter looked right, cracked the egg without counting, added sugar until you tasted it off your fingertip. These were the original donuts of rural Black kitchens. No yeast, no rising time, no special pan. The cakes fried up with a gritty golden crust and a tender center that tasted like cornbread, and cake agreed on something sweet. Across the Mississippi Delta, cornmeal never ran out, making these the dessert that survived every lean month and every empty shelf. The women who fried them could finish a dozen without burning one, hands steady in the smoke. Honey drizzle finish was applied to hot fried chicken straight from the oil, creating a sweet glaze that set into the crust. The honey was warmed slightly so it poured easily, then drizzled over each piece while steam still rose from the golden coating. The heat partially caramelized the honey, creating sticky sweet spots that contrasted beautifully with the savory, peppery crust beneath. This technique was reserved for special occasions because honey was expensive, but when it appeared, everyone knew the meal was a celebration. Some grandmothers added a pinch of cayenne to the honey for sweet heat that lingered on the lips. Others mixed in a splash of hot sauce for a more complex flavor profile that balanced sweet, salty, and spicy in every bite. The honey finish made ordinary fried chicken feel like a feast. Brown paper bag fried chicken was a technique passed through generations of African American cooks who understood that perfect coating was all in the shake. Seasoned flour went into a large brown paper bag with the chicken pieces. The bag closed tight and shaken vigorously until every piece was evenly coated. The paper absorbed excess moisture while shaking ensured coating adhered without clumping in hot oil. This method was economical and practical, eliminating the need for multiple bowls and creating less mess in kitchens where space was precious. The coating fried into a crust that shattered beautifully with each bite. Children often begged to do the shaking, turning meal preparation into family activity filled with laughter. Plastic bags and dredging stations have replaced this method, but something was lost when the bag disappeared. She mashed them while they were still hot. Sweet potatoes pulled from the oven, skins splitting, steam rising off the orange flesh. Mixed with flour, a crack of egg, nutmeg, grated fresh, and just enough sugar to let the potato lead. Fried sweet potato cakes had roots running to West Africa, where similar fritters called puff-puff were fried in palm oil at open markets. In the American South, the technique adapted to what grew in black family gardens: sweet potatoes by the bushel, shaped by hand, flattened into thick patties, and fried in lard until the edges crisped into a caramel dark crust while the center stayed soft. The key was never over-mixing. You wanted flecks of potato in every bite. Sprinkled with cinnamon and served hot, they showed up at Sunday tables and after-church gatherings. By the 1980s, boxed mixes replaced from scratch frying, and these quiet cakes slipped off the table without anyone asking for the recipe until it was too late. Cornmeal crusted variation created a grittier, more rustic coating that crunched differently than pure flour versions. The dredging mixture combined fine cornmeal with flour in ratios that varied by household, some preferring half and half, others using just a quarter cornmeal. The corn added subtle sweetness and golden color that darkened beautifully during frying, creating a crust with more tooth and texture. This variation was common in rural areas where cornmeal was more affordable than refined wheat flour. The coating held up better for packed lunches and picnics, staying crispy longer without absorbing moisture. Some grandmothers toasted cornmeal before mixing to deepen flavor. The technique connected fried chicken to cornbread, tying together two southern pillars. Fried chicken backs and necks were the pieces that never made it to the platter, but always disappeared first in kitchens where nothing went to waste. These bony cuts were seasoned with garlic powder, onion salt, and cayenne, then fried until the small pockets of meat turned crispy and bones became almost edible. African American cooks knew that backs and necks held concentrated flavor that breast meat could never deliver. Children gnawed on these pieces like prizes, sucking the marrow while adults prepared presentable cuts for guests. Butchers sold these cuts for pennies, making them essential for families stretching budgets while still delivering satisfaction. Today, most backs and necks end up in stock pots or discarded entirely, but once they were the cook's reward and children's favorite secret. Nobody called them cookies. They were fried cakes, sweet rounds, or just them things mama makes, depending on the household. Fatback fried cookies use simple sugar cookie dough dropped into a skillet where rendered fatback, thick pork fat saved in coffee cans on every black southern stove, served as the frying medium. The fatback gave them a faint, savory undertone that balanced the sweetness in a way butter never could, and that flavor separated the women who knew from those who guessed. The dough was mixed stiff, pinched small, flattened between palms, and fried until both sides turned deep gold. drained on brown paper bags and dusted with sugar while still warm. Through the 1950s and 60s, these showed up at Christmas, Easter, and on summer evenings when kids needed something sweet to chase with cold buttermilk. The tradition faded when vegetable shortening replaced fatback. The women who rendered their own fat are gone now, and so is everything they carried in the taste. Nothing died in those kitchens, not bread, not milk, not even the heel gone stale 3 days ago. Brown paper bag seasoning technique achieved perfectly coated chicken pieces without making a floury mess across the kitchen. Seasoned flour went into a large grocery bag, then chicken pieces were added a few at a time and the top folded shut before shaking vigorously. The tumbling action coated every surface evenly while keeping flour contained. Children were often recruited for shaking duty, making them feel included while grandmothers tended hot oil. The paper absorbed excess moisture from the chicken's surface, helping flour stick better than coating done on plates. After use, the bag was saved for next frying day, building seasoned flour that carried memory of previous batches. This showed how grandmothers solved practical problems with creativity. Smothered fried chicken was Sunday dinner royalty in African American households, combining two beloved techniques into one unforgettable dish. The chicken was seasoned with salt, pepper, and paprika, dredged in flour, and fried golden until the crust crackled. The magic happened next when sliced onions softened in the drippings, and rich gravy was built from flour and broth. The fried pieces returned to the skillet covered, simmering until fork tender, the gravy soaking into every crevice of that crispy coating. Families served it over rice or alongside biscuits that soaked up every drop of savory liquid gold. The dish represented patience and love, transforming simple fried chicken into something that made guests push back from the table satisfied. Though smothered chicken appears occasionally, this technique has largely faded. Fried apple turnovers owned the fall. The apples were always dried, never fresh. Dried fruit concentrated the flavor into something candy-like and held together without turning to mush. Families sliced their own from backyard trees each September, stringing them above the wood stove to cure. The dough was simple: flour, lard, salt, cold water, rolled thin and cut with the rim of a coffee cup. A spoonful of stewed apples in the center, edges crimped with a fork, and the whole thing slid into lard so hot it sealed the crust on contact. You never pierced the dough before frying. A single hole meant the filling leaked and the oil went dark. Kids learned that rule before they learned to read. These traveled in coat pockets to school, in baskets to church, in paper sacks to funerals. When bananas turned black on the counter, too soft for slicing, too sweet for anything sensible, that was exactly when they became perfect. Hot sauce, marinade soak was the secret behind chicken that carried heat deep into the meat rather than just on the surface. Chicken sat overnight in buttermilk mixed with generous splashes of Louisiana-style hot sauce, letting vinegar and pepper penetrate every fiber. This produced meat that tingled with warmth from first bite to last, surprising those who expected heat only from the crust. Grandmothers adjusted amounts based on family preferences, making milder batches for children while preparing spicier pieces for adults. The vinegar also tenderized, working alongside buttermilk for impossibly juicy results. Some families used their own pepper sauce from garden-grown peppers. The technique proved seasoning worked best when given time to develop. Fried chicken with pepper vinegar was a combination that shocked visitors but delighted those raised on its sharp, bright flavor. The pepper vinegar was made by steeping hot peppers in white vinegar for weeks until the liquid turned fiery and complex. After the chicken came out of the fryer, still glistening and crackling hot, diners shook this pungent condiment directly onto the crispy coating. The vinegar cut through the richness, while the pepper heat built slowly, creating layers plain fried chicken couldn't deliver. African American households kept bottles of pepper vinegar on the table year-round, using it on greens, beans, and especially fried chicken. Making pepper vinegar was a household tradition, with each family guarding their ratio of peppers to vinegar. This condiment elevated fried chicken to something memorable. Fried banana fritters took overripe fruit and turned it into something golden, crisp, and impossibly rich. Mashed into batter with flour, a beaten egg, sugar, and cinnamon, then dropped in rounds into hot lard. The natural sugars caramelized against the oil, creating edges that crackled into the warm center. Caribbean influence ran deep. Plantain fritter versions existed across the islands, and as families from Jamaica and Trinidad settled in southern port cities during the 1940s and 50s, those recipes merged with African American frying traditions already old. Some cooks added vanilla. Others drizzled brown sugar dissolved in butter over the top. The whole thing cost almost nothing and used fruit headed for the trash, resourceful and indulgent in the same bite. Lard render frying was how grandmothers achieved that impossibly golden crust with flavor vegetable oil could never match. The lard came from rendering pork fat saved from previous meals, strained clean and stored in jars until frying day arrived. Grandmothers heated lard slowly in heavy cast iron, testing temperature by dropping flour bits and watching how they bubbled. This fat created a crust that shattered on first bite while keeping meat perfectly moist inside. It added subtle richness that modern oils simply cannot replicate. Families who raised their own hogs had the freshest lard, but store-bought versions still outperformed anything else. The used lard was strained after frying and saved for the next batch, building layers of seasoned flavor over time. Before donuts came in boxes, there were molasses, dough balls, small rounds of flour, egg, and dark molasses dropped by the spoonful into shimmering lard. They puffed golden and crisp outside while staying dense and chewy within, carrying the smoky sweetness only blackstrap molasses could give. During the Depression, when white sugar was beyond reach for most black households in the rural South, molasses kept dessert alive. A jar cost almost nothing and stretched further than anything in the pantry. Mothers in Alabama and Mississippi fried batches on Saturday afternoons, rolling the hot balls in whatever sugar they had. Sometimes brown, sometimes raw cane, sometimes nothing, because the molasses was sweet enough alone. Kids lined up at the stove with outstretched palms, burning fingers and not caring. What started as a way to make something from almost nothing became the treat kids begged for even when the pantry was full. Seasoned salt secret blend was mixed by hand in small batches and stored in repurposed spice jars. Grandmothers combined regular salt with garlic powder, onion powder, paprika, black pepper, and sometimes cayenne in proportions they never wrote down. The mixture was rubbed generously onto chicken before the buttermilk soak, creating a base layer that penetrated the meat. Each family's blend was slightly different, making their fried chicken recognizable at community gatherings. Some added celery salt or dried herbs, while others kept it simple with just 4 ingredients. The homemade blend cost pennies compared to store-bought, but delivered flavor commercial products could never match. Children learned to make it by watching, carrying the knowledge forward. 30 dishes, 30 lessons from men who never needed a recipe. The grills are rusting, the oil drums are gone, but the tradition is not dead until the last person who remembers it stops speaking. Go find a bone-in pork chop. Season it with whatever is in the cabinet. Grill it hot and flip it once. That is the beginning. If there is one dish on this list that your father made, name it in the comments and tell the people where he cooked it. Somewhere in West Memphis, a man's grandchildren still remember the smoke